Okay, I think it's probably a good time for us to start. To welcome everybody that's attending this roundtable discussion this afternoon, which is celebrating the voices of Black and Brown women in psychology, in line with the Black History Month theme, saluting our sisters. I think it's safe to say that this is one of the first sort of discussions like this. So we will talk about the experience of being Black and Brown in psychology, what the current climate is in the profession at the moment. We will pay homage to those trailblazers who've encouraged us as a generation to work in the field, and also to think about any barriers, historic, current, and what can be done to overcome those. We will have some introductions shortly. I think it's really important just to talk about the fact that we are going to be talking about our own individual experiences, and that we're not going to be able to cover the whole Black and Brown female experience. But this will just be an insight into, the thoughts and perspectives that we might have. Thinking about some of the terminology that we might use terms that other people don't use, and we'll be respectful of that. And that might also come up in discussion, about the way in which we describe ourselves, describe others. Maybe some housekeeping. I'm hoping that lots of the conversation will resonate with many of you. And if you do have any sort of questions, do pop them in the chat, and that we will have 10 to 15 minutes at the end to explore and discuss any themes or questions that come up for you. I think I'm hoping I'm co-chairing with Deborah Husband. I'm hoping, Deborah, that I haven't forgotten anything there. If there's anything that you wish to add, okay, I'm getting the thumbs up, which is good. We were talking before about sisterhood, and the fact that this is a supportive space and we're going to support one another. So that's really helpful. I might now ask our fellow panelists, who we're very grateful to have here, to introduce themselves. And I'll start with Jenny, perhaps, if you'd just like to introduce yourself. Welcome, Jenny.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Eluwa. I'm a chartered clinical psychologist, and I've been practicing in this capacity for over 10 years. And I think it's been a very interesting experience. I've practiced outside the UK, and I'm currently practicing within the UK. And so it's interesting to, see both worlds, so to speak. And I'm really glad I'm part of this panel, and like Mel has said, it's a space, a reflective space for us to kind of reflect on our experiences, and then that might throw up discussions, and we all will talk about it. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And Ione, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Ione. I'm a forensic psychologist. I'm just really, really excited and grateful to be in this space today, and to share some sisterhood and speak about our experiences. I work in a medium secure setting at the moment, but have experience of working across various settings. So I guess you'll probably hear a bit more about my experiences in those settings later.
Thank you, Ione. And Jolelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Jalil, and I'm a child health psychologist, and I'm originally from Luton, but I'm up in the northeast in Sunderland as a lecturer in psychology. And by heritage, I'm a British Bangladeshi, first generation self student.
Thank you, Jalil.
I forgot to mention. Sorry. I sit on the Equality Diverse Inclusion Board for the BPS, the British Psychological Society.
Yeah, thanks, Jalil. And Amelia.
Hi, I'm Amelia Baldwin. I'm a chartered counselling psychologist, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of the West of England in Bristol. I lead in EDI and decolonial practice And I've worked in this area with this particular interest for about 2 decades now. I'm mixed race, and I think that experience has really led me to a career that I feel has some hope to address and redress the issues that we might be looking at today. Yeah, I'm like everyone. I'm really excited to be in this space, and with the theme of saluting our sisters, and I think that the that psychology has a lot to offer in terms of how to address these kinds of experiences. So I'm really looking forward to today.
Thank you, Amelia. And I might introduce myself and then hand over to Deborah. So my name's Melanie. I'm an educational psychologist. I've been a psychologist now for about 14 years. I'm currently the co-chair of the Division of Educational and Child Psychology, the EDI working group, and I teach 1 day a week at the Institute of Education. For me, it's just been amazing to hear the different disciplines. I'm not sure that I've been in a panel before with so many psychologists from different disciplines, but also that look like me. So I think that's a really good space. And I think, as Amelia was saying, psychology has so much to offer. And I'm hope that anyone who's watching and is either in the profession or is aspiring to, that this just gives us a bit of, rejuvenates us and helps us continue on our journey. And Deborah, do you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mel. So my name is Deborah Husbands. I'm a reader and a chartered psychologist. I describe myself as a sociocultural psychologist. So I'm really interested in sort of social psychology, experiences of different phenomena. But I'm also interested in, the way in which we respond and react to our cultural environments. So that sort of frames the work that I do, and it's situated within the realm of student experiences, student engagement, marginalized experiences, and so on. I'm the co-chair for the University of Westminster's BME colleague network, and Mel's already said a little bit about terminology, so I'm not going to get into that. And I also lead the Black History Year programme at the University of Westminster, because as much as this is Black History Month, we don't focus just on the month. We recognise a 365 contribution of Black people to the history of Britain. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but before I do, I want to say that, I got into psychology as part of a process of trying to understand myself. I'd gone through some life experiences, and I wanted to understand why I reacted to those experiences in the way that I did. And I was also interested in some of the things that, I'm hearing about here. So I wanted to be an occupational psychologist at one point, a counseling psychologist, and literally I wanted to fix the world through psychology. But I ended up settling as a kind of a teaching academic and researcher in higher education. And I think that's the brilliant thing about the discipline is the diverse routes that are represented here. And of course, there's far more outside of this space. So I'm going to start by asking a question, and it's a kind of high level, sort of conceptual question, if you like. And we'll get into your experiences a bit later. What's your view of the current climate in the profession for Black and brown psychologists? So I'm going to repeat the question, and invariably you might talk about your experiences, but I'd like you to put them aside just for a bit, and just from a very kind of, kind of high level, what's your view of the current climate in the profession for Black and brown psychologists? So I'm going to start with Jalal, and then others feel free to chip in.
Thanks so much, Deborah. I think there's, my main point would be that it's changing at the moment, it's evolving. So there's a lot of activity when you look at like around trainee psychologists, they're using it to help their sort of doctoral applications. So you see the intention, you see a bit more a connection between people, I should say. That's the main thing that I'm seeing. But In terms of the challenges, I will let other people draw on. I don't want to repeat that information, but yeah, for me, I can see it changing, but there are significant barriers and problems for Black and brown psychology, both at the trainee level, but before that, graduate level, and then post, you see it's like a pattern, thinking what's happening here seems to be very consistent. So that's my answer.
Yeah, and just very quickly, I just want to ask you, talk about people connecting. You can see some connections. What's that look like? What do you mean by that?
I think that's done in a sense of support. So for example, like, they know they're helping other people, they're helping other graduates like them to say, okay, this is your career path. Here's some career paths around clinical route, education route, health route. So they're getting more involved in the conversation, trying to mentor the others, even though they are difficulty at themselves, they're helping the others. So this is what I mean by connection.
Yeah, thank you. Ione, what's your view about that? Do you feel connected?
Connected, yes, but I think I probably have my foot in two camps. So I see lots of trainees coming through who they're connecting within their cohorts, and there's more diversity in their cohorts, which is really encouraging, and there's lots of allyship in the cohort as well. So that's really, really encouraging. But the other camp I have my foot in, I guess, is a bit more about my own experience of not feeling quite connected when I was a trainee, a graduate, trying to navigate the land of forensic psychology. Yes, I do think it's really encouraging that things are changing. And I do think there's more opportunity for someone that's been doing this for a little while to connect in with the generation of psychologists that are coming up that are actively connecting with each other and promoting allyship. I think that's really, really great to see. But I'm also curious about this bit that's beyond the qualification and at the higher levels, sort of the management leadership level, where the connection is there.
Really good points. So obviously connection is a theme, and it's a good one. And I think it leads nicely into just thinking about representation, because again, you're talking about leadership. How does that flow through the profession? So what do you think, Amelia, about representation in the current climate for Black and brown psychologists?
Yeah, I think representation is really important, and I've certainly seen over the years that we have more diverse cohorts, and but I guess representation can mean different things in different contexts. So the fact that there are people who aren't white in white spaces doesn't necessarily mean that things are changing in a meaningful way. And we look at issues like the Eurocentric curriculum, and I think there needs to be, I guess, representation also needs to mean that there isn't only something added, but that there are voices and views in all levels of an organisation and a system, for there to be changes that result in something different. Because psychology, I think, is it's a field that is also representative of diverse communities that we're hoping to serve. And if we have this Eurocentric view, we can't serve the populations that we're here to help. So I think, yeah, I think there's a multi-level view of what representation means, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's certainly something that we can't fully unpack in this session, but and we I think if we were to really kind of think about representation, we'd have to dig into the differences that are happening right across the different contexts of psychology. But I think sort of hand in hand with representation, we've also got the issue of resources and resourcing, almost sort of two different things. And I want to turn to you, Jenny, in terms of where we are in the current climate. What's your view on how well psychology is resourced, and how well is it resourcing others?
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. I think with the current climate, I think we still have some work to do within the Black and brown people in the profession. I don't think we really have so many psychologists out there. And so I'll kind of try to bring in my experience here, if that's okay. I remember that when some years ago, someone saw me after I introduced myself as a clinical psychologist, and their response were, "Wow, this is the first time I'll hear that there's a Black psychologist." So that goes a long way to adding to what Amelia has said, that there's still so much to do. Yeah, we see that tokenism, so to speak. There's that tendency to appear as though that other people from other ethnic, the minor ethnic groups, well, in this case, we're talking about the Black and brown psychologists, are being represented, but how involved are we in the decision-making process at all levels? Talking about mentors, talking about our view counting at the I don't want to say the junior level, but at that base level, how are our views being taken into account? We can even extrapolate that into the Black and the minority groups not wanting to access medical or mental health services because they feel that their own interests are not represented. People don't really understand. I come in with a difficulty, and someone tells me, oh, interprets it based on their own understanding of things. So all that are things that really needs to, discussions around those things really need to keep on going, so that we have resources out there. We have enough Black and brown psychologists who are then able to then go out there, because that's what we do, and help support people who really need that support, from a psychological point of view.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think you've touched on a really important point there in terms of perhaps the community perception of psychology and how that feeds into the notion of sort of barriers to entering the profession. And particularly, we know that, there's been a long-standing kind of argument about the lack of Black and brown clinical psychologists to address exactly what you're talking about, Jenny, in terms of mental health needs. And I'm just wondering, very quickly, I'll go back to you, Jalal, in terms of barriers, what do you see as the barriers to entering the profession? And I know you're a health psychologist, so it might look a little bit different to you than it might look for a clinical psychologist. But if you were to just kind of reflect on your own experience of coming into psychology, what were the barriers, or maybe there weren't any, and that's fine. We can tell the good story as well. But what was your view of entering the profession?
Yeah, such an important question. Thank you, Deborah. I think we need to have that relation, isn't it? It's the first thing, representation. We discussed it. So if you come, especially at entry level, if you're coming in, I think if you don't recognize anyone that looks like you, the curriculum doesn't look like you, you're not going to be bothered. You're not going to be motivated. You'll be disconnected, disengaged, and you leave the room, and you might pay the fee. So that's, for me, that's the first thing. Is the content and the people recognizable? Do they identify with what I'm familiar with, and not learning about another group of people, which we did for a long time? And you end up basically post qualification, if you like, you realize there's so much stuff I've missed out on, and think, did I really get the value for money here, for education? And so we have to be in tune with contemporary times in that sense. We're not getting taught an out-to-date syllabus. So I think that is the big thing around, the starting point is like, is the content recognizable? Is it identifiable? Is it represent me? Does it include me? Because if it doesn't, then what am I doing it for? I think most people come into psychology, the students I speak to, and personal experience is to make a difference, to make an impact, to help understand the human process so we can assist them. But when we talk about humans, who are we talking about? Are we talking about other people? Are we talking about our first frame of reference is actually people that we can relate to? So if the context and the content is not relatable, then I think that becomes disengaged. So I think you'll see large groups of people will go for other disciplines like business, marketing, law, medicine, because they can make impact socioeconomically, right? Psychology, we've got that big gap in that sense. And I think that is one of the strong barriers in terms of conceptually about, especially around inclusion.
Thank you. And before I hand over to Mel to take the next question, I'm just going to throw this one out there. So, there's sort of two sides to the profession in one respect. There's the applied psychologists out in the field doing great work, and then there are those in academia. Do you see, and I'm opening this to anyone, do you see any sort of distinction between the work of an applied psychologist and some of the barriers that we've been discussing here and the work of, a psychologist in academia? Is there an easier road? Do you think? Is it easier to work in higher education as a kind of a teaching practitioner, or are there sort of more benefits to being in the applied arena? So that's for anyone, or is it just whatever goes?
I think that's a really interesting question. I've never thought about it. And having worked mainly in the applied area and then moving into academia, I think that there are similar problems, similar issues. And I think what Jalal was saying is so important, because actually entering this profession, we need to be looking at the reason why we're doing it. So what is the reason for me as a counselling psychologist? Why do I have this client? What is the socio-economic, what are the systemic issues that bring this person into the room? And I think that, they're related. And I think academically, I see my role as the next generation of counselling psychologists, and supporting that journey. There's one thing I was thinking about counselling psychology, is that there are barriers. I mean, it's more and more competitive to get into a training program, and I think given that you may experience different discriminations, you might not be given the benefit of the doubt, I think, in certain situations. So people who have got masters, who've got lots of experience, they may have had more opportunities there. And also the counselling psychology route is not funded. So it means that, this is a big investment, placements aren't funded. It is something that, there's so many barriers there that represents.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. And I'm going to hand over to Melanie to take us through some more questions.
Thank you, Deborah. I just think the conversation so far has been really important. It's been sort of very reflective, and it's just made me think about lots of things. I think, Amelia, when you were just talking just now about academia and applied psychology, I guess for me, one of the reasons that I joined the profession and became an educational psychologist was thinking about the experience of children and young people in education, and just thinking about some of the barriers and some of the statistics that we know about the young people that get excluded, thinking about your lifelong outcomes. I'm also mindful, though, that to think about how our own life journeys have impacted us and what our experience has been as Black and brown people in psychology. So I think as we shift now, we'll look a little bit at that now. So thinking about what has it been like to be an applied or in academia as a Black or brown person. I'm probably going to go to Ione first, just to give us, a brief overview of, her experience. And you can talk about positive, and as Deborah was saying, negatives as well. I think it's good to have positive stories, but also some of the realistic things that people experience on a day-to-day, those microaggressions, all those sorts of things that may come up for us?
Gosh, really, really interesting question. My experience, I guess there's a real difference between forensic psychologist in training and qualified forensic psychologist, IONI, because I think when I was in training, there was all the stuff around feeling really othered, feeling quite isolated, sometimes feeling like the lone voice in the room, and struggling to find legitimacy in my own authority, and trying to find out where I fitted. So where was it that I was going to make the most impact? And naively, I guess, I probably had these grand ideas about making huge impact. But now I'm thinking you're one person, you can make a little bit of impact in a small space and be happy with that and not take on this massive task of trying to change the world. I've had experiences of, when I in training, I went to a Crown Court once and I was questioned by a security guard who asked me if I was the defendant's sister, defendant's mom, defendant's next door neighbour. But when I told him that I was the psychologist in training supporting him, the defendant, this man all about nearly fell off his chair and sort of said, most people that look like you come in and they're supporting the defendant because they're family. And that's one of the experiences that really shook me whilst I was in training. Because it made me think about when I walk into rooms, what do people think? And am I given the same sort of respect, credence as other people? And a lot of the time I wasn't. And that was really, really difficult. And I think the training was probably one of the most difficult things that I have done, but also the most joyous thing, because I think I've learned so much about myself. And I've learned so much about the world around me. And I sort of, Deborah, I completely resonate with your point about psychology as a tool to learn about yourself and who you are. But then also equally as a qualified psychologist, I've had people asking to touch my hair. I've worked in spaces where I have been the only Black psychologist. And that's been difficult because sometimes you do get, well, you can work with this person because you're Black and you understand. And there's this assumed monolithic experience of Blackness, and we all know that's not the case. So it's a mixed bag. But I think there's something really about understanding your core values and understanding yourself, feeding into yourself, and really staying closely aligned to what you're there for as a psychologist.
Thank you, Ione, for sharing. And I guess I'm just thinking about the audience who will be listening to and hearing, I guess, the multifaceted experiences that we have, like the joys, as you mentioned, and then those challenging experiences, and I guess how we manage those on a day-to-day. I think, Jenny, you were talking a bit about tokenism, and I was just thinking about some of the things that Ione was saying there about generalizations that people may make, or when they see us when we walk into a room, how they perceive us. And I'm just wondering if maybe, Amelia, you would like to talk a little bit about your experience of being in psychology and what it's felt like for you. Again, the positives and the negatives, and anything that resonated in what Ione was saying.
Yeah, I was thinking about, what you just said about assumptions. And for me, I think as somebody that can pass as various ethnicities, there's often that kind of assumption or even questions, about, who I am, what I am. And I think for me in psychology, I have often been the only person who isn't white, um, and um, and sometimes it feels like if I don't bring this issue to the table, is it going to get talked about? So if this is something that I do choose to work with. And it's really, my reason for being a psychologist. But I think that there's often that extra work that you have to do, I think, to make sure that these things are addressed. And then also, I guess that, it does it does take a lot really to do that. So yeah, I guess there's positives and there's negatives, as you said, Mel. But I think, you know, tokenization really is something that really resonates with me. You know, that idea that that you represent something in a particular at a particular time, and making sure that I think, like Deborah was saying, that Black History Month isn't just 1 month, that it continues through the whole year. So yes, yeah.
Thank you, Amelia. As you were talking, I was thinking, you know, we're all qualified psychologists, and I was wondering a little bit about the experience of getting onto training courses, you know, what people's experiences were and how they found, I think Ione, you touched a little bit on it, about how finding a voice in the training space. And I was just thinking a bit about our responsibilities, or, you know, what we think about the profession, the younger profession, the newer profession that's, you know, joining, and what some of those barriers might be, and what they look like. What were our experiences of training, getting onto training courses, having mentors and those sorts of things. I know that, Deborah, you touched on this slightly. I was just wondering, in our role now as qualified psychologists, how do we support new entrants to the profession? So Black and brown psychologists, what do people do in their work? And I might start with Jenny and then go on to Jalel, if that's okay.
Interestingly, in my work so far, you know, within the UK, just thinking, I don't think I've supervised any Black or brown psychologist, and I think that in training, that is, and I think that says quite a lot, you know, and I think for me, one of the very important things there is that we have people like us, you know, who are Black or brown in the profession, and you know, like we've been saying, one of the main reasons we are here is to let them know that people like us can, you know, go on this type of career, the psychology profession. And so for me, when I have that opportunity to speak to people, one of the things I highlight is the role of mentorship. You know, people's experiences are different, but we can all draw from the experiences of people. I remember when I relocated to the UK, you know, from, you know, abroad, it was a Black clinical psychologist, you know, who I started with. You know, I went, you know, someone connected me to her, and that was where I did some voluntary work, you know, just for me to understand the terrain, understand what is expected, you know, within the UK as a psychologist. And I think that was quite helpful. So if for example, we have you know, places or resources where we can signpost, you know, these upcoming generations to, I think that might be very helpful. And you know, one thing that readily comes to my mind is that we need, you know, if there are ways that we can encourage people who are upcoming, even at the level of this morning, I was just reflecting in my head. I said, from, you know, high school level, we can have awareness courses where people know that, well, psychology exists. It's a profession, and people who are Black or brown can come into this profession. The other day, my daughter came home and was like, "Mom, I told my friend that you're a clinical psychologist. She wants to be a psychologist, and she's just in primary school." So if at that grassroots level we can start creating that awareness, and you know, and and look for ways to start signposting people to the resources they need to start getting prepared to come into this profession. I think that might be something very helpful for the younger generation who are thinking of, coming into the profession, or who are still undecided about what they want to do, but want to be relevant to people, of their communities, so those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Jenny. Really useful reflections, I think, thinking about how we encourage, inspire, how we reach out, just thinking about our own journeys, accessing mentors, the amount of people that contact you, email you, Twitter, LinkedIn, and then I guess the responsibility to then try and reply to everyone and to make sure, just thinking about opportunities that we've had. So Jalel, I thought I'd like to invite you just to think a little bit about our role in supporting people on their journeys.
Very powerful what Jenny said. I totally agree with that. I think what I would like to add is transparency is absolutely important. To tell the trainees or students or people exploring about these are the challenges. Give them a reality check, but also show them the solutions. Okay, this is how we're going to get around it. This is what we're going to do. So you need to give them some hope and some inspiration, because they're wondering how they're going to survive, right? And forget the discipline right in this world. But if you give them some visuals or some examples, or say this is how you can go from A to Z, will help you, then at least they know they've got someone there in their corner fighting for them, looking after their interest. And it's important for them to develop as an independent creative thinker, as a psychologist, but just letting them know, saying, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that for you, we're going to put this in place. But the second point I would say is around, I talked about self-advocation. They need to self-advocate because no one's going to do it for you. The second point is around psychological trauma that comes with the dehumanization process about discrimination, racial discrimination, things like that. So, having a care package and say, okay, if this happens, whether it's a job interview, whether it's that application, or whether it's at this process or promotion, what is the trauma sort of therapeutical process looks like for these people, and say, because it's quite unique, especially in the discipline of psychology, where it's concerned with human ethics. And if you get involved in this area around and where people are doing the opposite, you're going to have a lot of moral injury. So we need to come up and address that as well. So say, okay, well, how are we doing it? Not just saying it, but what does that look like? So two things. One is about advocacy, empowerment, role modeling, and two is about therapeutical recovery, keeping them safe and well and able to function and able to make more difference, more impact, because they're going to tell the next generation. So that's how you do it. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Gina. Really powerful reflections there. And I'm mindful that we need to move on to the next topic, but we didn't get a chance to talk about what it's like to be Black and brown in leadership. Thinking about, maybe that's something that we can think about for another topic, for another day. There are so many things that we can talk about. And I think, Deborah, we're now going to just be thinking about paying homage to those Black and brown sort of psychologists, female psychologists who've paved the way, passed the baton on. So I wonder if, Deborah, we should open it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm really itching to say something if I can, just based on the previous conversation, because, this whole issue of, sort of moving on, moving in the professions, a lot of it rests on quality mentoring. So being able to identify people who are prepared to walk with you, advise you, support you, sort of be that kind of reflective space for you so you can do some sense making, do some identity grounding. It's a really important thing, but it's equally important to recognize that not everyone who has arrived, so, they're a counseling psychologist or their health psychologist or whatever it is, it doesn't necessarily make them a mentor. A mentor has very particular qualities and a level of understanding and compassion that I think sets them apart. But by the same token, we also need to recognize the emotional labor that's involved in being that Black psychologist. And, everybody sort of wanting to come to you because you look like them and you represent that safe space and they can talk to you. And invariably, most of us, we've got the heart of compassion. We want to take it on, want to be there for everyone, and we burn out. So there can be a problem. So we need to recognize, all sides of the coin. But In terms of paying homage, yeah, I mean, I think, this is all about saluting our sisters. We need to recognize Black women psychologists, and sometimes they're not always, by definition, absolute psychologists, but they may have had some kind of influence as well, bringing us to the understanding that we have, bringing us to this space. And, it's about sort of thinking about them, recognizing them, celebrating them, paying homage to them, and just calling their name. I remember Kimberly Crenshaw did that really powerful piece on intersectionality where she just had the audience calling out the names of all those women that had, gone through forms of brutality and so on, so that people like us can still stand. So let's open this out. You may have people that right now you just want to say their name, and maybe say something about why they're important to you. I know I have one or two people, and they're not necessarily psychologists, interestingly, but they are people that are important to me. But we just want to open up this space now, and to anybody who wants to reference a particular person that has had a significant role to play in your journey. If they're a Black woman, fine. They don't necessarily have to be.
May I?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Deborah, for just that point about emotional labour, because it's so important. We don't formulate trauma in the way that we should, or racial trauma in the way that we should. So thank you for raising that. But I have three people. My first person is an educational psychologist who I worked with before I qualified. Her name is Heather Dawn Grant. Sadly, she passed away in 2013. But she was an exceptional educational psychologist. She advocated for young people so well. And to be in a room with her at a meeting was just incredible. The way that she held herself and poised herself and commanded the respect that she deserved in that room in very difficult conversations was just incredible. My second person is Ghislaine Kiamwani. She is the founder of Race Reflections, and she's doing some fantastic work around racial trauma. She's a group panelist, she's a psychologist, she's a psychotherapist, fantastic. And you should check out her work if anyone's not aware of her. My third person will remain nameless, but she's my mentor. I'm so fortunate to have my current employers pay for the mentor through a Black and Asian mentor scheme, and she's incredible. So I just want to not say her name, but just acknowledge her as a fantastic mentor and all that she gives to me as a mentee.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing those names. And with some of the names that the ones that are in public domain, by all means Google them. And as you said, Ione, we can kind of look at their work, and maybe even approach them and sort of get advice and so on. So absolutely fantastic. Amelia, do you have a name or two to share with us?
Yes, I think straight away. I think just to echo what you were saying, Deborah and Ione, about the how difficult this experience can be and how important it is to have mentors. I was thinking that we have all these names like inferiority complex, invisibility syndrome, imposter syndrome. There's all these things that are really us internalizing the negative messages through our training. And I think that it's so important that we have these spaces. And one of those that's been so important to me through my training is the Black and Asian Counseling Psychology group, which was set up by the wonderful Yatunde and Ahima. So yeah, I wanted to give them a special mention.
Thank you so much. And yes, I know Yatunde, powerful force in the area of counseling psychology. Jenny?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I should, but I think one of the things I also wanted to say that everyone who has spoken has also said is that you know um, emotional labor just it's sometimes it's really difficult even as an applied psychologist. There's so much that we experience, and we have to make that extra effort, if I may, do more than, others who are not black or brown, so to speak, just to show, just to tell ourselves that we're doing all that we can, and carrying all that is so much, and I think that's the place of mentorship. And with that being said, I'll at this point I don't want to mention her name, but I've always told her that she's a mentor. She's someone I can go to, reflect on things I'm going through with. She's not a black and brown person, but she's that compassionate, has that understanding. So I just want to give her a shout out, if that's the right thing to say, and just say thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I mean, yeah, and this is absolutely the point I was making, that it's not always that they're going to be black or they're going to be brown, but what they are going to be is there for you, and that's what matters. Jaleel.
Yeah, for me, it was my tutor at university. She's black, and she kind of gave me back my self confidence, because the others basically didn't really engage or in that way. But I think she got it. As soon as I walked in the room, she should make you feel welcome. Name's Dr. Christine George, if anyone is interested. And I wonder, like, if it wasn't for her, I don't think I'd be where I am today with the level of confidence, motivation, morale, because she's shown me psychology can be a happy place, like it can be quite accepting, and therefore you embrace your identity. That's what I picked up from her. Not just me, the other students too. They felt really safe in our company, and I think what's the word? I think that was one of the biggest, still is the biggest influence. So it's actually the first psychologist who's black who came in, and it really influenced my what I do today.
Thank you so much, Jaleel. Christine, I hope you're listening. That's fun, and that is, to use Jenny's term, that's a fantastic shout out for Christine. And in fact, I'm going to ask you, Mel. Who's your saluting your sister? Who's your sister?
So I think I've got a group of sort of black female psychologists that I draw on, talk about cases, talk about some of the experiences. I think when Ione was talking about walking into the court, thinking about when you walk into a school and how people might perceive you. So I've got a really good friend and colleague, Santia, that I'm not sure if she's watching, Santia, but I often will contact and just talk things through. And then I've got a psychologist that I met, an educational psychologist, who's the first black female psychologist. I met her probably 3 years ago. She's called Waveney Bashaw. And I would say that she probably is quite an informal mentor, someone that I can go and visit, talk to, have conversations. And whenever I think things are difficult, I always just think lots of people came before and I can continue on this journey, no matter how difficult it is. And there are times I think I think, Jaleel, you've spoken a lot about transparency. I think we have to be transparent that there are difficulties as well as the positive bits. So I just think, I probably draw on my network of psychologists that I've met over the time, and then I reflect back to people that came before. I'm mindful, Deborah, that we haven't asked you, that we should need to maybe ask you and then give some time for questions, because if there are any questions that come up. So Deborah.
Yeah, no, I think similar to yourself, Mel, as well. I have a group of psychologists, and interestingly, none of them are black, none of them are brown. So it just goes to show that this isn't about ethnicity. It's not about the color spectrum. It's actually about people who are there for me, and they're people that have walked with me my journey. They've given me advice. I'm going to just name one person in particular, but there are many others. So Professor Catherine Loveday, absolutely fantastic human being, really willing to step into my space. And we've done a lot of work around decolonizing the curriculum. And in fact, Catherine has shown herself to be willing to make herself vulnerable to learn, to understand, to grow. And I salute her, and I'm proud to call her a sister. But there are others as well. Like we don't have time to sit and name them all. But there are lots of women that have been really important in our lives. Let's go on to the questions because we are heading towards the end of this webinar. We're absolutely clear that we could sit here for the rest of the day and continue this conversation, but we want to give time for the audience to ask us some questions. And I think there's some questions that may well have been left for us to ask. Do you want to take the first one, Mel?
So the first one is about Black therapists, psychologists do they have more resistance from clients? Someone's here talking about therapy. Most of their therapists have been white, but only the Black one asked if their ethnicity caused any feelings or reservation. And they're just talking about the positionality, being a mixed race person and connecting with people from different backgrounds. So I guess the question is, as Black psychologists, have you experienced more resistance from the clients that you've worked with? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, interestingly, yes. Sometimes you walk, you attend the therapeutic space to have a session with your client, and you notice that, from my own experience, I've for some of them, you notice that resistance, and so many things play on your mind. You start asking yourself so many questions, and sometimes you ask yourself, you doubt yourself as to, are you doing things right? So and I think when these happens, there's that tendency for um, you know, for someone to start questioning themselves. And in such situations, I've kind of told myself, well, it's not about me. This person sitting before me has certain difficulties, and that's what I have to deal with. And I think for me, it's always been helpful to go back and reflect within my supervision space, and I think the difficulty there is if um, the supervisor does not understand that experience, and this then highlights the need for more Black or brown psychologists, or people from the same, who understand the cultural, the culture, who understands your experience, So yes, I've experienced such resistance, but I just tell myself, well, it is not you, but always find a way to take it back to my reflective, to my supervision space or reflective space.
Right. So there's a couple of questions that are pretty much the same, and I'm going to be a little bit cheeky, and I'm going to direct them at you, Melanie.
Okay.
So two of the questions are around mentoring.
Right.
So the persons are asking, how do we go about obtaining mentoring? And the second question is about understanding more about the job of an educational psychologist. So I don't know if you want to kind of link them or address them separately, but I'm directing those to you.
Thank you, and I'll try and be as succinct as I can do. If you are already training or in the profession, I think one of the things about looking for mentorship is that increasingly there are more and more professional groups for Black and brown psychologists, and I think that answers another question in the chat. So I probably would connect with one of them and see what services they're offering in relation to mentoring. So an educational psychologist, there are a few interest groups that I can mention. You could get in contact with them. I think that when I went into services, I looked for people that I felt I could connect to. And I think, as Deborah was saying, they may have looked like me, but it also was at a relational level as well, whether I felt that they could contain me, whether they heard me, whether they understood me. So I would look for people around you, but contact specific groups. There are groups that do exist. I think when I sort of started the training in 2006, I would say that there weren't any. I didn't see them, but now I think increasingly there are more. The role of an educational psychologist, I think it's really varied. You work with children and young people from 0 to 25. In my role, I work in a pupil referral unit sometimes. I have primary schools that I work with. If at a leadership level, you might be looking at thinking about psychology systemically across a local authority, the delivery of psychology to like 70 odd schools. I think the role is really varied. There are great links on the BPS website. Contact your local authority. Most services offer open days for people who are interested. And what we can do afterwards, Deborah, maybe make some links that people can check out. I'm mindful that we've got a few minutes left, and I don't want to sort of dominate encouraging people to become educational psychologists. But any other questions?
Oh, that's great. And we're going to run over by a few minutes, but apparently that's with permission. So thank you for the attendees as well. And I hope that's okay with you. I want to join a couple of questions again in the interest of time. So we said we weren't going to go there, but we're going to go there, but only very briefly. So whoever picks up on this question, if you could just answer this as succinctly as possible. So someone's asked, how do we feel about the term people of global majority in place of BAME? And we did say racialized terminology is a contested area. It's a really difficult one. And at the same time, they're saying that their understanding is that the term's been derived to encourage all of those who've been othered and discriminated against for their skin color to start seeing themselves as globally connected. So that's the people of global majority term, while decentering whiteness as the norm. So is it a term that resonates with you, global majority? Do you have a view about BAME, black and brown? And I want to link it with a question about, is there a need for a group that identifies as such? Whether it's a group of, the global majority psychologists or the black and brown clinical psychologists, is there a need for us to have these distinct groups that are culturally centered? So sort of two questions in one, but if you could kind of just briefly share your thoughts on both. And that's open to anyone. And maybe it's a very difficult one.
It is a very difficult one. Personally, the term BAME, it's not for me. I actually cringe when I hear that term. I think it's very reductionist, and it doesn't give, it's very reductionist, I guess, and it's just not for me. I think, but then equally, some people who are black and brown prefer that term to global majority. So how do we all get together to decide what the term is? I guess it just be led by the person that you're referring to. Personally, I like to just be called a black woman because that's what I am, and I'm Ione. Some people like to be part of the collective and have a particular term. That's not really for me. I'm a black woman. I don't see there's a reason for a grouping term.
Yeah, thanks. Melanie, is there a question that we've got several questions here, but do we just try and take one more? And is there one that you'd particularly like to see answered?
I think there's one question from someone who's saying that they're a new graduate, and they're saying that even if you're volunteering for positions, you need substantial experience. They were looking to train in a specific route, and all the routes have sort of longer times. And they're thinking that HR might be a more viable option. So how do new graduates, how do they navigate employment in psychology without feeling completely deflated by their options? What would we be saying? Anyone got any thoughts or reflections?
I think be open to hostility, but also be open to there's good people out there. Like, don't stop trying. Like, there are some really problematic individuals who just won't help you, but majority, I do believe that they're good. So the idea is to keep experimenting, keep trying. If that one doesn't work, go to the other one, try that one, get referral. So it's that sort of energy, that sort of drive that you kind of needs to have and say, do not give up, do not pursue. That's what my tutors told me. And you'll find that door in the end, you'll find that person in the end, but just don't stop trying. Like, we're all here.
Yeah, thank you, Jalal. And I think I'd add to that, persevere. And also, though the training route seems longer, I guess for some of the careers, you get a form of bursary, and there are conversations going on about uplift and thinking about the cost of living crisis, so that people can actually train and receive payment. I know, Amelia, you were mentioning about the differences between different routes and whether they're bursaried or not, or whether they offer any. So I would just say that we probably need to think about how we influence policy to make sure that all the divisions equal bursaries and an increase. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to add, because I guess that is something to think about, finance and who is able to afford to train and to sustain.
The only thing I would add is just to validate how difficult the training routes are, because they are difficult, and they are very unfair, and there's a lot of inequality. There'll be people that can afford to work for free, and the people that cannot afford to work for free because they have responsibilities, dependents, and so on and so forth. And we don't get an even spread of people across the profession, from all socioeconomic backgrounds, and that's not fair. And it's something that we have to look at, those of us that can, influence policy, like you say, Mel, because it is really tough when we lose a lot of talent at that level of A level, and then at the level of undergrad as well. So yeah, it's definitely something that we need to look at and resolve for the betterment of the profession.
So Deborah, I can see that we're needing to round up with our final thoughts. I guess
Can I just say something? Sorry, I just wanted to speak to the question about whether we need groups, and I think for me, I would say yes. I think that we really need to look after ourselves. I think self-care is so important, and to find groups, to make groups, I think that's really, for me, that it's a definite yes to that question.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So we've literally sort of come to the end. So in rounding off and finishing up, we just want to first of all just say that there will be some signposting to resources. So there will be some resources on the website. And they will be populated over the coming weeks with more information that's relative to this conversation. So do keep an eye on the BPS website. And also there will be a recording available as well if you want to listen again to some of the fantastic comments that have been made by the panelists. But just to finish off, and this will literally be almost like a one-liner, this is a question. So you're asked to pass the baton to the next generation. What advice would you give to an aspiring psychologist? And literally no more than a couple of sentences. Let's get that response. So I'm going to start with Amelia and we'll work our way around.
Sure. I think just continuing from what I just said, I think find those spaces that validate you, that nourish you, and just really look after yourself.
Thank you so much. Ione?
My advice would be exactly the same. Seek community with like-minded people, and seek nourishment from those people.
Thank you. Jenny?
Yeah, my advice would I'll also allude to what Amelia and Ione have said, but I also want to add, say something that someone said, and she said, never be limited by other people's limited imagination. And another thing to add to that is look for the right information in the right places, and I guess resource materials that will be provided might be a helpful way to do that.
Right, thank you so much. And Jaleel?
Turn up every day, be your authentic self is so important, because because people don't want to work with you, they'll let you know, and people do want to work with you, they will let you know either way. But yeah, be yourself, turn up to your authentic self to be at work.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to just share mine before I hand over to Mel to close off. So my view is, if you want to work in psychology, do the research, find out about the discipline, ask people, talk to applied psychologists, do some volunteering in the area that you're interested in, if possible. More importantly, be persistent, stay in your lane. The journey looks different for everyone. Some people will sail through, some people will find it challenging, but you're going to reach your natural destination if you don't give up. Trust yourself, and in time you will come to trust the process. Over to you, Mel.
Absolutely. I think I'll just echo everything that everyone has said. And just to, like you said, keep going, persevere, and find your space. Find those people that can and do want to support you. And I guess I'd end by saying we need you. So if you're considering this as a profession, keep going. We need you. I think as we close, I think the conversation has been so rich, and I think some of the comments in the chat have been about the fact that people would have liked to have said more, that they'd have liked for it to have been longer, and that there are many things that we didn't get a chance to discuss. And I think that this is probably a call to action, really, just to think about having more of these spaces. The fact that people are asking for it, and we've got so many participants today, it's just thinking about how we facilitate that. So, you know, as we end, I think I would thank our amazing panelists. I think I'd like to thank my co-host Deborah, the audience for listening and participating, and we hope to see you again soon for more of this rich discussion, because it's evidently very needed.